I mean, you watch your own stuff like that, and what's it like for you to watch? Can you laugh at it like the rest of us?
I've got to say, I haven't seen that OJ piece since we locked that show. So
Okay,
embarrassingly, I did laugh at that. But
I
that was
hope
hidden.
so.
That was hidden camera. That was hidden camera. So it was quite a tense shoot, and she was quite brave to be to be in there.
That was great. All right, so this brings us to the just incredible past year that you've had with both Borat subsequent movie film, writing and starring, of course, in it, and also Trial of the Chicago 7 as, of course, Abby Hoffman. And I guess I want to begin with there was overlap chronologically in this that I'll leave it to you to explain, but let's start with Borat, the sequel here. Um, what made you unretire this guy 14 years after the last time you'd played him? I mean, was it? I think it's not a coincidence in timing.
So to follow on, so I had the same feelings of anger at what was going on in America, and the same, deep revulsion at this, dismantling of democracy and encouraging of racism, basically. And what Who's America had shown was that we can have a bit of an effect. So Jason Spencer, who was a state senator in Georgia, had lost his job for screaming the N-word on Who's America. And it was just after the midterm elections. I'd done a tiny piece of Borat on the Jimmy Kimmel show, so I knew that it was possible to do Borat in the real world. And I sat down with my two collaborators that day, Dan Swimer and Ant Hines. And I said, is there a movie that we can come out with that can be released just before the election that might possibly get some of the fans to go out and vote? Right? Could we do that? Because if we don't do that, what do we, how can we stand by? How can we be bystanders?
Mm-hmm.
And we came up within half an hour with this concept of Borat giving his daughter to the vice president as a gift from Kazakhstan. And yeah, that was it. That was it. We wanted to also touch on this theme of misogyny as well, which was at the heart of Trumpism. And if we could show that or remind the audience of the misogyny at the heart of Trump's inner circle, and we were aiming to do that with Giuliani or somebody around him, there might be an incentive, particularly for women to go out and vote and men who cared as well.
Yeah.
And so really the idea was to make a movie that was entertaining, that was emotionally engaging, but was a reminder of everything that the Trump regime had done wrong in the prior 4 years and was a call to action. Did we think it would make an impact? We thought it was near impossible, but we felt we had to make something so we could look ourselves in the mirror on November the 4th and say, we did something. We did something. We weren't
Yeah.
bystanders.
Just like two logistical questions. What how did you think you could bring Borat into America and at this point and have people behave unsuspect? Most people I would think know who Borat is.
So we had a huge research team trying to find people in America who didn't know Borat. But then obviously they would have to be the right people for the scene. And then I realized the same thing that Borat realized, which was to make the movie, for him to make his mission, we both had to go in disguise. And so there's that added question. And I remember us discussing it for months in the writer's room. How can Borat be funny in disguise? Is Borat still going to be funny? Or are we going to think, oh, this is another Who is America character? How can the audience enjoy Borat underneath this character and have the disguise extreme enough for the real person not to recognize Borat? And so that, we had brilliant teams of, makeup and costume. We even had Colleen Atwood, three-time Oscar winner, help us, as well as, the brilliant Erin, who was the head of our costume department, and Thomas Caloric. But we had, that itself was a real learning process of what are the costumes that we believe that Borat would choose.
Well, the other, obviously, one of the other major decisions that you made that proved to be brilliant was casting a Bulgarian actress who nobody had ever heard of or seen or given much credit to before, and having her along for the ride. She's now going to the Oscars as a Best Supporting Actress Oscar nominee, having won a Critics' Choice Award. Her whole life is changed forever. She's now, I'm sure, Rudy Giuliani's in his nightmares probably at this point, or dreams, who knows? But I guess what was the process of how'd you find her?
It was a challenge. We interviewed hundreds and hundreds of actors around the world. We interviewed many brilliant comedians in America who, could speak a second language. And then often what we found was we'd put one of the parts of the audition process was they'd sit in a room with a real person for an hour and try and deliver some of the jokes that we'd written. And within a few minutes, by the time they delivered the first joke, the real person would go, "You're an actor. This isn't real." And so we needed somebody who was a brilliant actor who could blend in these jokes seamlessly into a complete persona. We went round the world. We, looked throughout Eastern Europe, and we needed somebody, she is a phenomenon. She's a one-off. She is incredibly courageous, right? She's in real situations, sometimes dangerous situations. She is very, very funny, hilarious. She's an incredible improviser. And fundamentally, she's a deeply emotional actor, right? We realized this movie would only work if you really cared about Borat and his daughter and their relationship. And that's going to be doubly hard because the audience are watching in two different ways. They're watching the scenes with me and her and real people and going, oh, those real people don't realize that I and Maria are not real. And then they're also going to watch this skeleton of this emotional relationship of these scenes of me and Maria alone. And so she would have to be such a good actor that she'd have to convince the audience that they're in this real movie again. So bring them back to this real movie and forget about the fact that there's this real element to it. So yeah, she's a phenomenon. We could not have made the movie without her. It would not have been anything as it was. And I said to her again and again, and we just had a look at the behind the scenes footage, just as she's going in to see Rudy Giuliani. I said, if you do this scene, you're getting nominated for an Oscar. So there was no doubt in my mind.
You have that on camera?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I guess just one last question to do with Borat before we go on to trial. I've got to ask you. I mean, we've talked about the fact your heel got injured at one point. You've had different police chases, all kinds of stuff. But I think that you maybe before the rest of us had a look at what was coming on January 6th when you went to some of these gun rights rallies or kind of basically anti-COVID people, and one in particular where the Oscar shortlisted tune "Wuhan Flu" when you performed that in front of a rally. I want to ask you to share how you extricated yourself from that scene because there's a fine line between, I guess just it really could have gone another way.
Yes, it could have, and I was aware of that. And I remember putting on the bulletproof vest prior to that scene and looking at myself in the mirror and just thinking, am I completely crazy? Which probably most people watching this now would concur with. But again, it was important for me and all of the crew to just highlight the fact that these conspiracy theories that were being spread by Trump and the regime and by social media were lethal, and that lies can kill. When leaders lie, people die. And this idea of it being a Chinese virus that we termed the Wuhan flu as a direct reference to a conspiracy that Trump was spreading, was that people would engage in anti-Asian violence, which actually we've seen since then. One of
Very
the
much.
choruses was that, what are we going to do to the Chinese people? And the audience sang along with, we're going to nuke them up like in World War II. So firstly, obviously a historical inaccuracy, the Japan had a nuclear bomb dropped on it, not China. But I felt very passionately that we had to warn the audience before the election that these lies that Trump was spreading were dangerous, right? And they'd end in violence and they'd end in death. And that's what we saw in Washington. It's something that I saw the inkling of when I was making Who is in America, where I got a conspiracy theorist who believed in Trump's conspiracy theories about Antifa and that they were a terrorist organization. I got him to believe that he'd killed and blown up 3 members of Antifa at the Women's March in San Francisco. Because again, I wanted to posit that theory of when people believe these awful things, then they can commit atrocities. And yeah, that's why I felt it was worth taking a risk. That's why everyone felt it was worth taking a risk. We felt if Trump won again, it'd be a matter of time before he starts saying, journalists, these guys are enemies of the state. Let's, look what happened to Khashoggi. Maybe the Saudi Arabians got it right. Maybe these guys need to be locked up, right? So once you dismantle democracy, once you see people as enemies of the state, then it's easy to enact violence. And that is the logical conclusion. That was, I suppose, what I learned in history in university. And that's why I was so scared and felt so motivated to make Who is America, Chicago 7, and Borat.
Well, and that's the perfect transition to, yeah, I mean, you're at the same time, literally in some ways, going between projects over that period, going to also the trial of Chicago 7. But what people may not realize is, just as your interest in Abbie Hoffman goes back many years, so does your association with a film project about the Chicago 7, long before Aaron Sorkin was right, I think, to be certainly the director. And so I wonder if you can just share the unlikely evolution of your association with the project.
So, as I mentioned, when I was a student, I studied Abbie Hoffman, amongst others, and his role in the civil rights movement. Cut to 13 years ago, I find out that Steven Spielberg is directing the trial of the Chicago 7. Abbie, of course, is in it. With a certain amount of chutzpah, I call up, and for those of you out there, it's pronounced chutzpah, not chutzpah. I call up Steven Spielberg and I say, can I audition? I really want to play this role. And I'd done Borat at that point. I don't think Sweeney Todd had come out. And he said, listen, I got to be honest, I'm worried about the accent. It's a really tricky accent. It's a mixture of Boston and Brandeis and Berkeley. And so he said, I'm going to give you my main dialect coach. You're going to work with her for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, I want a recording of this speech. Every night for 2 weeks, I record 3 versions of this 2-minute speech. I start off, I'm terrible. Hello, my name's Abbie Hoffman type thing. At the end of the 2 weeks, we had about 30 takes, and the dialect coach said, take number 28 is perfect. Put it on a separate CD, give it to Spielberg. I call up my assistant at the time, and I say, take number 28, put it on a separate CD, deliver it to Mr. Spielberg's house by 10 in the morning. I meet up with Steven the next day at his mother's restaurant on Pico Boulevard, Milk and Honey. And his mother was there, actually. A very charming woman. And Steven sits down, he goes, listen, Sacha, thank you for giving me the CD. I really appreciate it, for doing all the work. He goes, I listened to it, and I've got to be honest, the first 10 or so takes were not very good. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, but by take 15, you're getting better. And by the mid-20s, you are almost perfect. And take 28, 29, you are on it exact. it was, you got the role. Um, Unfortunately, then two members of the cast passed away: Heath Ledger and later Philip Seymour Hoffman. There was the writer's strike. Aaron Sorkin was still the writer, and then the movie, you know, went through a bunch of directors until eventually I heard that Aaron Sorkin was going to direct it.
And even though 13 years had passed, was it a new sort of start from zero? You got audition again, or how did that go?
Well, I asked my agent, Richard Lovett, who, by the way, was completely instrumental in making this movie happen, because believe it or not, it was hard to finance this low budget movie, even with that cast and even with Aaron directing it. And he called up and I said, can you ask if they'd still consider me to play Abby Hoffman, even though I'm 13 years too old now? I was still half a foot taller. And amazingly, Francine, the casting director, and Aaron came back and said, yeah, Sacha's Abby. There's no one else we'd consider. So
You're very, very youthful. So I think that's not a concern for anyone watching it. But
very
now
kind.
I think
Thank you.
so. The thing that is maybe most striking when you compare and contrast these two films that you were part of in overlapping periods of time are the approach, in some ways it would seem, to the scripts. It's not, we've established, Borat, it's not that it's totally improvised, but there's a script that you work from and then you do what you have to do. With Aaron Sorkin, I don't think you improvise very much, right?
No, I mean, I tried to. And, part of my research on Abby Hoffman was to read everything that he'd written, listen to every audio recording there was of him, including opening up some new archives. And every time I found a new line or two, and I'd email Aaron, I go, what about this line? We've got to use this line. He's talking about women's right to choose, or he's talking about systemic racism. We have to do it. Or he's hilarious here. And Aaron every time would say, thank you, but the script is as it is. There was one moment that he did bend on, which was the idea of Abby and Jerry dressing as the judge. And I managed to finally convince him to include that. But no, it was about, really, my job with Chicago 7 was, because it was a low budget movie and there were a limited amount of takes, was trying to make sure that the first take was exactly what the director wanted and what he'd envisaged for 13 years, 14 years for him. And then I said, listen, because he'd often say, okay, we've got it after one take. And I'd say, please just give me another take. And so I said, listen, this is something I do on Borat and the other movies, is when I'm short of time, I'll give you a take and then I'll give you a 3-second pause for the editor to have an in and an out, and then I'll start the take again. So I'll give you 3 takes. If you give me a minute and a half, I can give you 3 more takes. And then in those takes, I'd dramatically change the performance in a different reinterpretation so that they had, 4 versions of each line.
It's really interesting. And I know that on this movie, you were also asked to do something that actors of your stature are not often asked to do on camera, which is listen, not act or in flamboyant way or speak or whatever. You guys, there's so many actors in those courtroom scenes and actors of the first order, right? And for weeks on end, it may be more about reacting, right? There were multiple cameras going.
Yeah, I mean, this was a masterclass of actors. I mean, there's many Academy Award winners there, and you have stars of stage as well. I mean, Eddie Redmayne and Frank Langella and Mark Wright. I mean, it's incredible. It's really intimidating. And yes, for the most part, they are listening to the action. It's a courtroom drama, and there were no egos there. There was nobody leaving and saying, you know what, I'll have a stand-in doing the offlines. Everybody listened, and when I'm on in the dock, the entire courtroom is there and all the extras, and it was just an incredible experience, really, of camaraderie. So I was very privileged that they allowed me to be part of it.
And I guess one of many great moments in the film, but one I guess there's two that I just want to prod you if there's anything you have to say about it, because when I think back to that movie, I will always remember the sort of showdown between your character and Tom Hayden, where it's these differing ideologies from guys who are essentially yin and yang. They're on the same team but very different guys. And then the other one, if you have anything to share, would be you on the stand, where we will remind people you're saying, I'm sorry, give me a second, friend, or whatever. I've never been on trial for my thoughts before, so really curious about those.
So the first moment for those who've seen the movie is, it's a confrontation between Abby and Tom Hayden. It's a confrontation between two different ideologies, one which is working within the system and one which is more revolutionary. And when Aaron was blocking out the scene, he goes, okay, at the end of the scene, I want you, Eddie, to grab Sacha and slam him against the wall. And I said, I don't get it. I said to Eddie afterwards, I don't get it. Why are we fighting in this? Why does it get physical? It's an ideological discussion. And Eddie said, well, this is the story about two brothers. I was like, what? He goes, Abby and Tom Hayden are two brothers who hate each other and come together at the end. I said, who told you that? He goes, Aaron's told me that from day one. I go, you never told me. And it was the perfect time to learn that, because I realized that this sibling rivalry in an argument between brothers or siblings, it can become erratic and random and violent. And there's pulling of hair and struggling. And then I fully understood the power of that scene, and also the power of the final scene when I'm in the dock and I give a compliment to Tom and I go, he's a true American patriot. And then the second scene, I'm in the dock, and it really resonated with me, because Abby was this clownish character that had used humor to humble the powerful. He was a bouffon of sorts. And suddenly he has to be serious. Suddenly he is the one chosen to represent Chicago 7. How he behaves in the dock will affect how they are sentenced. And that was just a very personal moment for me. I was about to deliver a speech a couple of days later at the Anti-Defamation League, where I was speaking in my own voice. And just for whoever's watching this, I'm very reluctant to speak in my own voice. I'm very
This is a
reluctant
rare
to use
treat. I know. I really want people to
I don't know
appreciate
if it's
that.
a treat.
No, it is.
This is my least popular character, Sacha Baron Cohen. So I was in the dock, and I realized, like Abby, I would have to be serious a couple of days later and talk about the dangers of social media spreading these lies and conspiracies. And I really didn't know whether to do it. And actually, I don't know whether it's I got too into the project, but Abby's decision to go in the dock and be serious and use humor to undermine the system, that was inspirational for me. And I'm just glad that it worked, and I didn't embarrass myself too much.
Well, one final thing before we look at clips of this remarkable 2020, for which you're being recognized by this festival, by the Academy, by all kinds of folks. I just would like you to share how you judged the degree of success of these projects. I think that November 4th was it wasn't November 4th because they dragged this shit out for a while, but your ultimate moment when you felt you could say whether or not this had been a successful endeavor, both of these.
With Borat, I felt the true success was, and if we cast our minds back to, I think it was October 22nd, our movie was being released. It was also the date of the final presidential election between Biden and Trump. And Rudy Giuliani was presenting a supposed hard drive, which he claimed was filled with evidence of the Biden family being a crime family. That could have been a devastating moment for the Democratic campaign. Um, and at that moment, the biggest news story about Rudy Giuliani, as he was on his way to present that footage and that evidence, was an image of him with his hand down his pants on a bed with a young woman. And uh, I felt it had an impact that day. We were lucky that Rudy Giuliani was somehow pivotal in the election. But I think to remind the audience and to remind the American public of what kind of guy this was, and obviously this was before him spreading the lie of a stolen election afterwards. I think that was, for that day at least, I think it was a good blow against autocracy and um, a good thing to buttress democracy that day. Um, did any of our fans go out and vote because they saw the movie? I've got some anecdotal evidence, but not enough to say it made any difference. But I'm just so proud, and we have these Zooms with all the cast. Well, there's only one other cast member, and all the crew and producers and writers, and it's almost like group therapy. But we're happy with how it turned out. If we made any impact, that's great.
Well, and I just want to
And
note that, I mean, there's no way it didn't with certainly, even if people didn't see the film, they saw the Giuliani moment, and so Americans have a Brit and a Bulgarian to thank for that. But and then I know you want to say about trial.
And the trial, I think it's an important movie, right? It's important to highlight the bravery of protesters. And we were shooting it prior to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests, or I should say the mass Black Lives Matter protests. But it suddenly felt an important movie, much more so than when I first started talking to Spielberg. And I remember my first conversation with Spielberg was, why are we making this movie? Why are we doing this? And we talked about the lack of ego. He said, well, why do you think we should make this? And I said, I don't know anything about acting or movie making, really. I've only made Borat. I think we should do it to inspire young people to go out and protest on the streets when there's racism or injustice. That's why I think we should do this. I think these guys should be seen as heroes. And that was a real debate. And I think Aaron finally came to that realization after a few years, and he discovered some footage that we recreated in the movie, which is Abby says he's ready to die in the protest. And that's when Aaron realized this guy wasn't just a clown. This guy wasn't just a fool, a prankster seeking attention. He was like a deeply thoughtful and courageous protester. And so I think it resonated, that movie. I think it really resonated, and part of that is Netflix got it out, and rather than being a specialty movie, they targeted it to people who liked those kind of movies. And so that's one of the plus sides, I think, of streaming. And it's an incredible coincidence that both movies came out in the same week. I knew about it. I hadn't told Aaron Sorkin or any of the cast of the Chicago 7 that I was making Borat. And I remember the head of marketing in Paramount said, we're thinking of releasing this movie just before the election because it's so timely. And I didn't want to go, hold on, I'm releasing another movie the same. But I think it was fine that both got released at the same time. And if any had an impact, then listen, this was a pivotal point in history. American democracy, it felt, was teetering on the edge and sliding into authoritarianism. And if America had become a democracy in name only, like Turkey or Russia, that would have impacted democracies around the world, right? America still leads by example. So
Absolutely.
if any of them had even one iota or motivated one person to vote, then that's a job well done to me and my collaborators.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to some footage of both Borat's subsequent movie film and the trial of the Chicago 7.